You're listening to Passions and Prologues, a literary podcast where each week I'll interview an author about a thing they love and how it inspires their work. My name is Adam Sokol, and I'm your host. And as I've been saying at the beginning of every episode, if this is your first time visiting in, thanks for joining me. If you've been here for the first several weeks of the show, I'm glad to have you back. Today's episode is an interview I did with Gilly Segal, which is kind of like a part two to last week's episode with Kimberly Jones. Kim and Gilly are co-writers of the fantastic bestselling I'm Not Dying With You Tonight. And I've known both of them for a while now, and they feel like family in the truest and most genuine sense. I adore talking to each of them, both together and separately. I even joke in this conversation with Gilly that it's next to impossible to wrangle either of them in, and basically impossible to wrangle them in collectively. They're just such fun spirits, and I always have a smile on my face when I'm talking to either Kim or Gilly. Gilly and I today talk about something she is deeply passionate about, which is hockey. And the conversation starts with the fact that she grew up with a father who had an interest in hockey, so she took a love to it, and then extends to her own kids who are now playing hockey at a very high level, and how she's become a very cool, hip hockey mom. At its core, this conversation really is talking about how children and parents tend to bond over things that we learn about as kids. For me and my dad, it was baseball, so much in the same. And we have a lot of discussion about how my relationship with baseball and my dad really mirrors Gilly's relationship with hockey and her son, as well as her dad. And we just, it's a sprawling conversation like many of these were, but it's a lot of fun. And then we get into, of course, how hockey has inspired her work, and she's working on a extremely cool new project, which I'm not going to spoil. You're going to have to listen to the second half of the conversation to hear her talk about it. But I will just say, if you are a fan of Marvel Comics, you're definitely going to want to listen in. Really, really loved every second of this. This might be the longest recording session that I had. She and I were talking late at night, and while the episode itself is a normal length, the recording session, I think I ended up removing like 45 minutes of it because it was just us chatting about life, or I had forgotten to hit stop recording. So you will never hear any of those things, but it is very fun. And I'm just very grateful to have someone like Gilly in my life. As I have been telling you all from episode 1, if you would like some book recommendations from me, you can email me at passionsandprologues@gmail.com. All I'm asking that you do is leave a quick 5-star rating or review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you're listening to the podcast. I know it's a thing that you hear podcasters say all the time, but it really does help people find us a little bit more easily. So if you wouldn't mind taking 10 seconds to scroll down on whatever app you're listening to right now and tap 5 stars and maybe leave a sentence or two about why you like the show, I would really appreciate it. And again, just shoot me an email if you have any questions or anything you would like to get some more feedback from. Okay, not going to take up any more of your time. Oh, hang on. I almost forgot to give you a recommendation of a thing that I'm reading right now. Wow, bad podcasting, Adam. I'm just going to briefly tell you that Ryan LaSala, past guest, if you are not reading The Honeys, his new best-selling novel, you absolutely have to, but I'll go beyond that and say listen to the audiobook. The audiobook of The Honeys is creepy and spooky and delightful, but it's one of those audiobooks where they really took a lot of time with the production of it, and there's background noise and there's different voices and there's all sorts of stuff. So if you're not listening to The Honeys, even if you've read it, I highly recommend the audiobook of The Honeys by Ryan LaSala. Okay, there we go. Got a recommendation in. Almost missed that. I am delighted to say that I hope you enjoy today's conversation with Gilly Segal on Passions and Prologues. Another fun thing about having my own podcast, I'm fine making a fool of myself, so we can do that.
I was surprised you went with hockey over the Eurovision Song Contest, though.
I know that you're a hockey human because I've seen your hockey mom Instagram stories and stuff. And so I know that you're very passionate about that. And also I do kind of want to paint myself in those uncomfortable corners with this. I guess could be like, I know a little bit about hockey. I know enough.
All right, well, let's teach you some more.
Yeah, let's teach me some more. All right, tell you what, like I said, I hit record a long time ago. So I'll do an intro and all those fun things that I have to do prior to this. So let's just get into it. Gilly, why are you so passionate about hockey? Let's go back to the beginning.
So I got into hockey through my dad.
Mm-hmm.
I am a child of the late 70s, and I grew up in the 80s. And I remember that like the media messaging and the social messaging at that time was overwhelmingly that dads want sons to do sports stuff with. And my dad does not have any sons. I have one sister and me. And I remember feeling terrible that my dad did not have a son to do stuff with. Mm-hmm. So now, mind you, this did not come from my father at all. My father has never cared. Gender and gender identity have never been a relevant thing to him. It did not come from my father at all. It strictly came from this sort of external social tidal wave of like all the jokes in the 80s about, anyway. So, but I was very conscious of this. And so at the time, I grew up in the Tampa area. And my dad would go to football games. And so I remember like expressing an interest in football. And at that age, it was like really little kid stuff. Like I learned the name of the famous players and, I had a t-shirt and all that stuff. But I was like, I'm going to be the sports kid for my dad. I'm not athletic at all. Like I played with Barbie dolls until I was like 12 and I enjoyed it. And I was a reader and I was a book nerd. So like zero athleticism, but I was determined that I was going to watch sports with my dad. And he was originally from Philadelphia. So much more of a hockey fan than a football fan. And so when the Lightning came to Tampa in the early 90s, my dad got season tickets and I would go to the games with my dad. Okay. And I really loved it. Like hockey was really fun to watch. It's much more exciting to go to in person. And so I would go to the games with him. I really liked it. And it took off from there. It was like me being sports child for my dad, who could not have cared less, by the way.
I will say, we were joking before, like I grew up with the EA Sports like video games, and I'm a huge soccer fan now, and it's 100% because of FIFA. Like it's like I played FIFA in high school and college with my friend, and now I'm a massive soccer fan, and that's why. And to me, like hockey is almost like supercharged soccer in the sense that like it's a team sport. It never stops. It's constant go-go, but it's just on a much smaller, much faster paced situation. And I will say, so I live in Cleveland. So the closest team we have is the Blue Jackets.
Okay.
And when they get into the playoffs, I absolutely, it's so easy. I feel like hockey playoffs, especially like the atmosphere, it's so easy to get into it.
It's a good time. Like I always encourage people go to a game, and it doesn't have to be an NHL game, by the way. Like if you live close to a city that has a minor league team, AHL or even ECHL, or if you have a juniors team in your area, like go, especially because those tickets are really affordable. And it's just a good time. Like it's exciting. It's fast paced. It never stops. It kind of doesn't matter if you understand what's happening because you're just watching guys flying around on sharpened blades, trying to whack a rubber puck that's frozen 100 miles per hour into a goal. It's just fun.
Listen, honestly, that's such a good way of breaking it. Like, if you want to break down sports like that, it's such a hilarious concept to think about.
It's very silly. Like, grown men do this for a lot of money, and women, because there's a professional women's league these days, too, in fact. But yeah, grown people do this for a living, and it's a little crazy. But you want to know the really funny thing about soccer?
Oh, absolutely.
We do joke that soccer is like hockey, only people fall down and roll around with their hands covering their face a whole lot less. I lived abroad for 7 years in a place where there is no hockey, and I got married to a guy who is a former professional soccer player. So when I had kids and they were very small, like my assumption was, and at that point in time, like, cause my ex was really into it. Like he was still really, really into it. So, the television was always on soccer, like hockey was not a thing in my life at that point in time. I strayed from the hockey path. And then I had kids, and my assumption was, they would play soccer like their dad did. And then after we got divorced, I always say, like, after we got divorced and I got control of the clicker back, I started to have hockey on in the house a little bit. My kids had this like teeny little street hockey set in the house. Nobody ever picked it up and played with it. I put them in soccer and they hated it. All three of them were like, this is the devil and we will not do it anymore. And so my middle son, he must have been 4 years old at the time. Mm-hmm. We went to one of these local, there's no NHL team in Atlanta where I live, but there is an ECHL team, which is the second tier minor league team. And we went to a game and my 4 or so year old son could not keep his eyes off the ice. He loved it to pieces. He came home and immediately picked up this street hockey set that no one had ever touched before and was like, hockey, hockey, hockey. And so I thought my kids just weren't sporty. I thought they were like, they had sort of more of my temperament was like, sports is not our thing. So I thought I was going to be the cool mom. And I was like, do you want to play hockey, bud? And he's like, yes. Meanwhile, I have tried to learn to ice skate. I tried to learn to ice skate when I was younger and it's really hard. Yeah. And I was like, this is going to be really hard and he's going to quit, but I will have been a cool mom and let him try it. Uh-huh. Well, he took off on those skates like he had been born in them. And he has been playing for 8 years now.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So
be careful being cool, mom or dad or parent, because you might find yourself 8 years later flying to Detroit for a tournament at the drop of a hat.
First
moral of this podcast.
See, this was me with baseball. I have memories of my father and I when I was in high school driving to like Bexley, West Virginia, or Knoxville, Tennessee for baseball tournaments. And
Everyville. I'm like Knoxville, Nashville, everyville that there is. We played hockey there. And you're like, I'm like unintentional sports parent. Again, I grew up watching sports, but not playing them. So the sports parent thing is super foreign to me. And I'm like, I say things like hustle now. Sometimes someone will yell hustle at one of my kids' games. And I'll be like, who said that? Oh, it was me. I said hustle.
There was an umpire that was like in the local area that did a lot of the high school games that I had played in. And he would always say, like in between innings, he would always say, hustle in, please, hustle out, please, every single time. And he was like a gentleman about it.
There's a whole vocabulary that sports people use, but just normal people don't. Like when in your life do you ever say hustle? You don't, unless you're on a field and there are, there's sports gear and people are running. I mean, I'm like, I don't say that word.
I'm trying to imagine like my tech job, my manager being like, hey, hustle up with that. I'd be like,
you would be like, sir.
Yeah, what are we doing here?
That's too much. You have gone too far.
Okay, so I want to go back because you're talking about going to hockey games with your dad. Yeah. And to me, so I unfortunately am, in addition to baseball, I'm a gigantic football fan for all of its problematic everything. But I mean, it's to me like Sundays in the fall is a nostalgic thing. Like I remember going to church with my mom so my dad is Jewish, my mom is Catholic, and we would go with my mom and my grandpa, who was a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. We're a big Cleveland Browns family because we live in like just outside of Cleveland. My grandpa would come over and like give my dad shit because my grandpa was a Steelers fan, and like, but every Sunday after church was football and like cold cut sandwiches and like so it's like in addition to just it being this ingrained American thing, football is a nostalgia thing for me. Yeah. So for hockey, for you, like you said, it started kind of with going to these games with your dad. Like how did it kind of continue to be a part of your life beyond that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when I was in high school, I wanted to go into sport. I decided I wanted to go into sports management. I really liked hockey. I was a writer even then, but I was very like, writers can't make a living. And so I was like, I need a job and I want to go into sports management. At the time, I thought I wanted to be the first female GM of a hockey team, which I will tell you what is very cool now, although I did not take that track in life, spoiler alert. This year, Vancouver named 2 assistant general managers who are women, which I think is really cool. I was like, oh, in my lifetime it happened. I really love that.
That's amazing.
But I wanted to get more involved with the team. And I was like, maybe I could write for them. Maybe I could be an intern. So this was back in the day when there were print newspapers. And one of our there were 2 sort of rival local papers. And one of them printed kind of an assessment of players on the team that I disagreed with. So I wrote disagreeing piece for the rival paper. Mm-hmm. I was like, here's why the other paper is totally wrong. And I sent it to the guy and was like, I'd like to be your unpaid intern, because this was the 90s and we cared less about that sort of inappropriate behavior. And he wrote me back and he said, I've never taken on an intern before, but let's try it out. So when I was in high school, I started writing for the Tampa Bay Lightning fan magazine. Again, this is like back in the day when you had print. It was like a free thing that got distributed at the game. But at 17, I was like interviewing the hockey players, and that turned into a paid job where I would write for a smaller athletic publication, and I interviewed tons of different players. And I went off to college and I was the volunteer manager of my college hockey team. It was a club team. They didn't have, I went to Penn for a year. It's the only Ivy that doesn't actually have a D1 college hockey team. Poor planning on my part. But I managed the club team, and it sort of became this thing. And then subsequently I left. I moved away from the US for a little while, and my life kind of took a very different tactic, and it didn't circle back to hockey until I had kids. But for a long time there, it was what I aspired to be when I grew up.
Mm-hmm. I have to tell you, we have never talked about this. I went to graduate school for sports management.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I went to Xavier University. So I went to a Jesuit college, John Carroll University. And before that, I went to 12 years of parochial school. And then I went to a Jesuit college for graduate school. So if like the whole deity up in the sky exists, I feel like I'm a shoo-in just from like the amount of money I've given.
Yes. You've been to a lot of.
I went, it was in Xavier, and some of the courses I took were sports marketing, that I feel like I'm using, even though I'm not marketing sports things, but like that stuff I'm using. But I feel like the coolest class I took, which I'm using nothing for, but it was the general manager and the former CFO of the Cincinnati Reds.
Ooh.
They taught a course on kind of like salary management and basically the way that a front office looks at the finances. But no, the course was like, I learned a lot about how there are specific managers in sports, and the baseball, or this not managers, owners, and the owner that they worked for, Marge Schott, who is a like famously terrible baseball owner. She basically instructed them to lose just enough money every single year so that the team itself was a tax write-off. It is like colored everything I see about any deal that goes through about any team. And I'm a fan of the Cleveland Guardians, our baseball team here, who is famously cheap. And I'm like, I know what they're doing. They're using.
Yes. Like at the end of the day, these are like super rich people who are not like they're. Yes. Yeah. This is the thing about like dreaming about doing a thing. And then when you start to actually, this is why I'm a big fan of actually internships, because I'm like, it's not as sexy. And all of these industries that seem sexy and romantic, like sports, mm-hmm. Professional sports and entertainment, which I sort of work adjacent to in my day job now, the reality of it is not what you think it is.
Yeah.
And it's like so much more corporate shenanigans than you anticipate. And a lot of times I'm like, you guys need to know that before you go into it. So if you're thinking of a sports management degree, kids, go intern.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm doing a thing that I found myself doing with so these first people who are listening to the podcast will probably, if you've listened to my previous podcast that I used to co-host, I'm guessing people are picking up that the first like 8 to 10 interviews that I'm doing are just friends of mine. And so I'm doing a bad job of staying on task, but I'm going to get back at it. So
okay, back on task.
We're back. We're being real serious. Listen, Gilly and I are doing this at like 9 o'clock at night. So this
is also partially my fault because I am notoriously unruly in interviews. And I'm like,
no, you're fine. Honestly, I'm used to interviewing you and Kim together. So like one at a time, I should be able to handle.
Yes.
What is it about hockey, removing the fact that your son loves it and that it was something you did with your father? Like, what is it about the game itself that kind of fascinates you and keeps you interested? And like, what are some of the things that just like keep you wanting to watch?
Ooh, that's a good question. I think one of the things that impresses me most about hockey is you are an expert in 2 sports in order to do it, right? Especially today, you have to be a superb skater, ice skater. Like you have to be excellent. Gone are the days of the like slow and, just big and lumbering. Like it's not, the sport has kind of moved past the goon era. So you're an expert figure skater, and they all take lessons and they work with figure skating coaches oftentimes. And you're also an expert hockey player. And I find that fascinating in a way that's different from other types of sports, right? Is you're merging these two separate skills and becoming an expert at both of them. And it's fast and it's exciting. And it's more fun to go than it is to watch it on TV. But again, in a hockey rink, you're very close to the rink. You can be based on where you're sitting, and you can hear the swish of the ice, and you can feel the cold, and you can hear the guys yelling at one another on the ice, depending on where you're sitting. And it feels very, you feel a part of the game in a way that's different from when I go, to a football game and there's, the whole sidelines filled with like 77 people. And I'm like, what do you all do for this team? I don't even know. Like only 10 of you are out there at any one given time. Why are there so many? I don't know. So it feels more approachable and accessible to me than other sports ever have. So that's part of why I love it.
We'll be back with more Passions and Prologues after this break.
Hi, my name is Sarah, and I want to tell you about my podcast called Can I Offer You Some Feedback? I'm a business consultant and executive coach with over 20 years experience in change management, leadership development, and naturally providing feedback to high performers. My podcast is for those of you who have a complicated relationship with feedback, whether giving, receiving, avoiding, or seeking. Feedback is essential for our development. In each episode, you'll hear from real people across industries with their ideas, perspectives, and best practices on feedback. I'll also be sharing business bites with you, simple explanations of organizational tools, management techniques, and leadership philosophies that will help you and your businesses thrive. You can listen to Can I Offer You Some Feedback on your favorite podcast app, or learn more at evergreenpodcasts.com.
And now, back to Passions and Prologues. It was like 4 or 5 years ago at this time, but my parents are retired, and my mom found a way. She paid for it. She got an Airbnb and tickets for her and my father to go to spring training for baseball. And you talking about approachability reminded me of that, because I went there and like met him there, and kind of the same thing, like baseball, maybe to like a slightly lesser extent, but similarly, like when you go to a professional baseball game, you're really close. Like you said, you can kind of, depending on where you're sitting, you can hear the people talking back and forth. The bat, exactly. You can hear the kind of ambiance, the ambient things that, because you're absolutely right. Like even someone who knows very little about hockey, I have been to live hockey games, and you're like, oh wow,
you can just be entertained. The guys are crashing into the glass literally right in front of you sometimes.
Yeah, and I do think and that was even, like I said, normal professional baseball games. Absolutely, you can do that. Like, because I've been fortunate enough to have close enough seats for like in between innings. If you just like say like, hey, Mike Trout, like he'll turn and be like, hey, what's going on? Like they'll talk to you. And even more so at spring training, because that's what they're there for, is just to kind of like get a little bit of work in and then talk with the fans. But I absolutely know what you mean. And like, to me, I have found myself as a person who is trying to become a professional writer. I have found myself writing in a way that makes me think about baseball. And this is a professional transition here. This is like how good I am at podcasting. So
very smooth.
Thank you. How would you say your love of hockey and your passion for hockey affects the way that you write as a writer yourself?
That's a really tough question.
I thought you were going to say really good question. And I was going to say, is it, or was it just me trying to stick to some sort of topic?
No, it is a good question. Tough questions are good questions, right? Like you know this, right? If you can ask things that we've never been asked before, it's a fun and interesting.
The whole premise of this podcast, honestly.
Love it. So I think it affects me in a couple different ways, right? Like the surface level answer is I actually write a lot about athletes. I haven't written a hockey boy yet. yet, although my son's hockey team discovered last year that I am an author, and they have been begging for a hockey book now. So there's probably a hockey kid in my future.
Yes.
I'm thinking maybe graphic novel hockey book. But certainly I write a lot about athletes. My ex-husband is an athlete, and I find the mentality of athletes really fascinating because it's very different from how my mind works and my body works. And so I'm in the midst of raising a, high performance athlete, and it's consuming. And so I write a lot about the mental journey of athletes. And I think a lot about what is the $1 billion youth sports industry really doing for kids in this country. And, we put incredible pressure on kids. Their lives become consumed with this. And then many of them are ultimately, there's only so many college scholarships, college spots, professional spots. The vast majority of kids who play don't end up in those positions. And if your whole identity is built around that, it can be crushing for a kid when they finally age out or they don't make it to the next level. So this fascination that started with hockey and how exciting it was to watch became an interest in what kind of person plays, and what kind of person not just plays, but makes it to the pro, and who do you have to be in order to do that. I do think there are certain attributes of pros that are common across all of them, regardless of what sport you're talking about. And that grips me, and I write a lot about that. I'm interested in it. And then the other thing is that sort of sense of being adjacent to an experience and it being tactile enough that I can describe it. I can tell you what the sound of the ice is. I can tell you, all of those things. And I think that inspires me as a writer to, I like descriptive writing a lot. I try not to do too much of it because I write YA, and it's not always the most plot gripping, but it does sort of challenge that part of my brain that wants to be descriptive and wants to find just the right word to describe how it sounded when the puck hit the glass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like you're always looking for that. Is it a thwack or is it a thwomp? Like those.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And can I make the reader feel like they were there? It's sort of like when I talk about hockey, I'm like, can I make my listener love this as much as I do and feel like I felt when I watched that exciting play? It's a challenge for me, and I like that.
And I do think that's one of the things where you will, like you said, you write kind of about athletes, and like yours and Kim's most recent book was there were athletes in that, and like
football athletes,
and trying to help people who are going to be readers who may not have an interest. Like it's very likely at this point for the two of you, like you have readers who know you from your writing, but they might not be a fan of a sport or anything. And you still have to find a way to kind of like hook them into that thing. And so I imagine like being at as many games as you're at, like all these different tournaments, all these different experiences has to kind of be informative as a writer.
Yes. I mean, definitely you meet a lot of interesting and different people, and hockey is historically a predominantly white sport. Unfortunately, there have been Black players since the inception of hockey, of course, but plenty of discrimination. Like you were saying, football is problematic. Hockey is also super problematic. But I think it is opening up incrementally these days. And there are more prominent players who are people of color who are talking about their experiences. In fact, speaking of books, I'm going to promote something that I just saw come out today.
Yeah.
Akeem Aliu, who is a Black hockey player from Canada, wrote a memoir called Dreamer. It's a graphic novel memoir. And it just went on pre-sale today. And I looked at it and I was like, pre-ordered. Have never pre-ordered anything so fast in my life. He's fascinating. And he's written extensively about the discrimination that he has suffered in the league. And so it's one of those things where I love the sport. It's also super problematic. We're Jewish. My son has been the subject of anti-Semitic statements as a Jewish hockey player. And I love this sport, and my kids love this sport, and also it doesn't always love us back. And so part of it is like, how can I be a better citizen in this world of hockey? And how can my kids be better citizens in this world of hockey? And make it aspires to be for everyone, but it's not going to get that way unless the people who are part of it are willing to move it forward and make changes.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, and like in really any sport, because it can be so easy to like romanticize the wonderful parts. Like again, I mean, at my core, I'm a like baseball, like dirtbag. It would be one of the like
one of our favorite family genres of movies is sports underdog. Like we have watched every sports underdog movie that has ever been made. And they're heartwarming and they're lovely. And I love those stories. And they are also part of the sports, but they're also not representative of all of the highs and lows.
Right.
And we tend to gloss over the ugly and uncomfortable parts. And that's part of why Kim and I write what we write, is those parts are there too. And we have to be able to talk about them, and we have to enable kids to talk about them.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's so important, is like, I think you have that perfect crossroads of being a person who writes professionally and someone who is passionate about a sport, and being able to kind of both shine a light on the wonderful parts of team sports or individual sports or anything. Like I know for myself, I am the motivated, dedicated person that I am in part because of the athletics that I did growing up. But I also can look at, like I said, like I love baseball. Baseball is on balance, not always, it's sometimes a gross sport with gross human beings. And that's true for every single sport. And so like being able to write thoughtfully about both the positives and negatives, I do think is really important. It's something that people should know about.
I do. Yeah. I mean, I think we can love things as they are and also aspire for them to be better. And in order to do that, you have to talk about it. You have to acknowledge it, right? You can't. The other thing that comes with the culture of silence that too many sports have embraced for too long is that really bad things happen in sports settings, in locker rooms, and kids are not comfortable talking about them, or there are retaliatory consequences. And so the culture of silence is also unhealthy and bad. I mean, you look at the truths that are coming out about abuse in the gymnastics world and in other worlds, and you're like, the culture of silence perpetuated that because kids couldn't speak up. So it's actually not just important to confront it, but also to create an environment where kids can confront it, because then they're going to tell what's happening.
Yeah. Speaking of, watch this. Here I go. I'm going to do another professional transition. Speaking of kids talking about what's happening, are you allowed to talk about anything that you're working on currently, either by yourself or with your co-author or anything? I know that there's like rules about this stuff.
So I can talk about one thing that I'm working on because it is public. I am writing this is my first solo project. It is a Captain Marvel novel.
I saw this. I'm so excited. Please, I honestly, this is what I was hoping you were going to talk about. Please say everything about it. You're allowed.
Yeah, it's really fun. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk. I can't remember whether the plot is public yet, but the title certainly is. It's called Shadow Code. And Captain Marvel is back on Earth for a little sojourn, and she is fighting a fascinating villain. I really love this villain. I'll give you a sneak peek. She's more of a psychological villain than she is like a punch-em villain, which I think, like, if you have a character like Captain Marvel, like she's basically invincible.
Basically invincible, yeah.
So when you're coming up, the fun thing about working with this is they accepted proposals for me, so I got to concept this myself. And you're like, well, who challenges Captain Marvel, right? Like, so the villain that I picked sort of is like a fun psychological villain, and it's been really good to write.
Okay, so I have been super fortunate over the years. I've gotten to interview a few people who have done this sort of thing where they've gotten to write stories about existing IP, like very big existing IP like this. Like, what is the process like? Do you have to like check things with them back and forth, or like, I guess you can be kind of like vague in general about this, but like, what is like, do you feel like you have a freedom on this, or is it you have to be super connected to their like existing storylines?
Yeah, I think I can talk about this. So you have both, right? I had lots of freedom. I had total autonomy to pitch them. They proposed an idea, but they also said, if you want to write about something else, pitch it to us. So I had total autonomy to pitch things. I picked out my own villain, and I'm getting to make up new characters who are inhabiting this world. So you have a lot of freedom to concept things, but you also have to adhere to the laws of the universe that you're working in. And there are a lot of laws. So two things can happen, right? Either you brush up against something that's too close to something else they're working on. So they'll be like, not that.
Yeah.
Oh, you want to, not that. But you have to also adhere to the laws of the universe that you're working in. So sometimes you will pitch things and they'll be like, that's not how powers work. Or that's not how technology works. And that was something, my deals with technology too. And they would be like, that's not how technology in this world works. And sometimes you're like, but you have superheroes. Can't
Yeah.
you make anything that you want to make up? And they're like, no, you cannot. So it's a weird combination of total freedom and also lots of rules. But you're also working with really smart and creative people. Like the Marvel team is incredibly creative. And I've gotten to have, like, when you're stuck, you're like, can we talk? And you have a meeting and they will pitch out all these amazing ideas to sort of help you get over what you thought you were stuck with. And it's also a really creatively expansive experience.
Yeah, I can't even imagine what that's like, because people who are listening, I feel like on balance, are going to know that I used to work at Overdrive promoting Libby. One of the jobs I got to do is I worked with Marvel, and we built out this, like, there were 9 different kind of from scratch images that they made for us that they put on Instagram and stuff that was like their characters promoting libraries and like ebooks. It was a wild thing that we were able to do. But even for those like single standalone panels, they would be like, well, Captain America can't be holding a tablet, or like these like little things. And that was just for like a single panel. So I can't imagine like telling a story, how many of those little idiosyncrasies they're like, no, you can't do that. That's
it's a lot. Like you turn in, there's a really extensive outlining process, and you turn and draft the outlines and you get it back, and there's the like whole margin is filled up with comic books of like, nope, not that. Sorry, nope, not that. But it's been really fun, and it is like, it's super exciting to work in this universe and to get to be associated with this. Cool. I love Captain Marvel. I told my agent, so there's 2 IP projects that I have ever wanted to do, and one of them was Captain Marvel. So when the opportunity arose, I was like, I love her so much. I identify with her so much. So,
well, I mean, I saw your picture that you posted, the drag. I don't want, like, the cosplay. It was so good.
Go see my Instagram. I have a little. My dear friend Rachel Allen just released a Harley Quinn novel. So DC versus Marvel. Obviously, Marvel is better. I will tell you, we did an event together to promote her book, and we took a poll. And I just would like everyone to know Marvel far and away beat DC. FYI. But we cosplayed the characters we were writing. So she was Harley Quinn, and I was Captain Marvel, and it was amazing and fun. And I'm totally doing it again.
Oh, that's so cool. Do you find it challenging to write in like this, like the graphic novel format, as opposed to long form, kind of like, several hundred pages type of a format?
So my Captain Marvel novel is actually a prose novel. So I'm not reading in graphic, although I really want to. And in some ways I'm like, it would be nice if it was, because I would be learning from the very best of the business. No, but this is actually a prose novel that's timed to come out right before the Marvels movie comes out. So there's Captain Marvel, Marvels. It's not related to the movie. It's a standalone adventure in the comics universe. This is the other thing, is like there's multiple universes these characters exist in, and I'm not writing in the MCU. I am writing in the comics universe. So they're timed to go together, but it's a standalone prose novel. So I'm not stretching that muscle yet, but I really want to. I really need somebody to, like, I don't know, do a graphic novel, be a critique partner stitch with me.
Oh, that's so cool. Okay. All right. I'm putting everyone on the spot, which I need to do a better job of this, but I'm ending with having every author that comes on give like a recommendation. It could be a show, it could be a movie, it could be books. So far, everyone has done books because they're authors. I'm not pressuring you to do that. It could be a food. What is something that you're loving just like lately that you want people to also enjoy? It could be books if you want to do that. It doesn't have to be.
Well, I'll break the molds because I'm a contrarian like that. And I'm actually going to recommend a whole genre of shows.
Yes. Let's do this.
I have gotten in a kick of like con artist type shows lately. So, and I don't know why, but I'm really fascinated by it. So I'm going to highly recommend Inventing Anna on Netflix, which is about a con. And that's a really fun one because the people who get hurt are like big banks and corporations. You're like not sad for her victims because it's not terrible. So Inventing Anna was great. Dope Sick is amazing. Dope Sick on Hulu. Not fun and not easy, but an extraordinary exploration of the opioid crisis and told in fiction format.
I mean, I assume you're watching hockey right now at time of recording.
I could do another recommendation. Actually, my recommendation is go see minor league sports. That's a real other recommendation, right? So I think sometimes in this country, we get fixated on highest level professional sports. And for most people, it's unaffordable, right? Like tickets are over $100 in most cases. It's, by the time you go and you park and you pay for a beer or you pay for a snack, it's really expensive. But in many cities, there are really great and really fun minor league teams that are accessible to you.
Yes.
Go and see them. It's much more family fun, family entertainment, and go see that. And that's my real recommendation is partake of minor league sports because sometimes they're a little, it's certainly not the highest level that's being played, but it's still a really good time. And also you should root for the Tampa Bay Lightning in the Stanley Cup finals that are happening now.
All right, listen, that's fine too. The minor league thing is the real recommendation. I have no dog in the hockey fight, but
well, now you can adopt the Tampa Bay Lightning as your team.
Here's the problem. I adore you, but another guest early on in the show is Mallory O'Meara, who I love, and she is a Capitals fan. And so am I supposed to pick between author? Because I feel like I met her right around the time I met you. And so I'm in a real pickle here.
Well, except her team's not going to advance beyond the first round, and ours probably will. So I feel like you can reassess next year, but for this year, I'm better off going with the Lightning. I mean, they're the 2-time back-to-back Stanley Cup champions. Going for the third. You can't three-peat is actually a trademark term, so they're not going for that. They're going for the third.
Gilly, I love you. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for
This was really fun. Thanks for letting me prattle on about hockey.
Passions and Prologues is proud to be an evergreen podcast and was created by Adam Sokol. It was produced by Adam Sokol and Sean Rule Hoffman. And if you are interested in this podcast and any other evergreen podcast, you can go to evergreenpodcast.com to discover all the different stories we have to tell.